Distinctively human is what we're talking about today. I've been following a line of thought that kind of connects us with our past in terms of the paleoanthropology and all of the archaeology and all of the things that we've left behind, and even raised the question, as some of these scientists do, what makes us human? And I want to look at this again. I've already answered this question a couple of weeks ago by saying it's the imagination that sets us apart. And I would like to elaborate on that a little bit, and I would like to also say that this is not a lesson in how to use your imagination. You all know how to do that, so I don't know if you know how to use it correctly, but I don't know that I'm qualified to stand up here and tell you how to do that. But what I would like to do is just focus on the fact that we have this faculty, and it's the thing that sets us apart from all of the other animal and plant kingdom. Every aspect of creation has some level of imagination, but none come even close to what we as human beings have. So this question, what makes us human? Science is grounded in materialism, explaining human qualities by what can be measured and observed. We walk upright, we have opposing thumbs, and we have a large brain. As I've been going over some of the material that's out there on this question, what makes us human, this is the primary answer that you get. Now you'll get a very complicated explanation connected to each one of these things, and also on a behavioral level you'll get many complicated explanations. But when you read between the lines of what most of them are saying, most of the scientists, most of the people in these types of scientists, this type of science are saying, is that it comes back to the brain, and it comes back to learned patterns. It comes back to what we picked up since we had a body. And so material science, or science, is grounded in materialism. This has not always been the case. Many of the early scientists were very religious people. And it's, as I have explained, I understand why science has moved away from some of the absolutist statements that religion makes. And how, like my friend on Facebook said, if you want to know why those rocks are out in the desert, read the Bible. It's all goes back to Noah's flood. A lot of that can be explained in that way. So you've got that mindset, and that goes against critical thinking. The whole explanation of how would you get all those animals into one boat and for that period of time, and how would you get all the animals in all of the world from that one part of the country? How would you gather them all up? And you'd be really lucky to catch the cats, to get them in there. But that's when you start thinking about, rational thinking, critical thinking, how would that actually happen? How big would that ark have to be? And how would Noah go about the entire world to gather them all up? So you start asking questions like this, as scientists do, and they say, well, that would not be possible, and here's why. They can explain why that wouldn't work. So what they do then is they reject it all. They reject the whole biblical account. And for a long time, they rejected the idea that there have actually been global floods, global flooding. At the last end of the last ice age, 15,000 years ago, 13 to 15,000 years ago, there was major flooding. And the people that are open-minded, the scientists that are open-minded, are saying, well, maybe these stories are actually grounded in fact. Maybe they're grounded in something that actually happened, but maybe it didn't happen exactly like the legend says, or the myth says, or the biblical account says. But they are reporting something that was traumatic to the human race. And I can totally understand that and buy into that. But science has to be able to measure it, weigh it, measure it, and quantify it in some way before they call it reality. Reality is material-based, and that happened over the last couple of centuries. That transition happened over the last couple of centuries. But then we have this problem that is raised by quantum physics, and it's a very interesting frontier. And this is not new by our standards. But it's a relatively new science, and it is beginning to. There are many quantum physicists that say that a fundamental of reality is consciousness. It's not physical, it's consciousness. There is some kind of a living awareness that exists beneath what we see. And of course the religionist cheers that on and says, well, that's God. We go back to the Bible. The Bible is correct. You know, now you're verifying that. Well, no, that's not what they're saying. They're saying there is an awareness at the deeper level that awareness, that consciousness preceded that which we see. It's exactly like our consciousness. Our consciousness produces the quality of life we experience. Where does that quality of life come from? It doesn't come from outer space. It comes from us. It's consciousness. There's something that predates the material side of our life, and that's the unseen. Our world is created in the unseen, in consciousness. But the materialist will say, well, that's a function of brain, and it goes on and on. There's no resolving this. I was listening to Pim Van Lommel again this week, one of the near-death researchers, and he said he's had the experience over and over where fellow doctors will come up to him at a conference or something and say, you know, what you're talking about here, I experienced one myself, a near-death experience. Or I know many people that do, and I have no doubt it happens. But he says they go out publicly and they totally denounce it. And he says, the interviewer says, why do they do that? And he says, because they may lose their job, or they may lose their funding. They may lose whatever grant that they've applied for, because that realm is what dictates what we're supposed to believe. And if somebody comes along and starts saying things that don't fit that narrative, the grant money dries up. And so they're very careful about, you see, the Big Bang theory is what's going. If you're doing research on something Big Bang, you'll get a grant if you apply, if you know where to look. If you are saying, well, I don't believe in the Big Bang, here's another alternative, you probably are going to have a real hard time finding money, finding people to support you. That's what's interesting about Dr. Ian Stevenson, who started interviewing children that were claiming they had past life memories. He was a psychiatrist, and he began to get interested in this kind of thing, and it was questionable whether he would continue in his profession, be able to continue in his profession. But a person stepped forward that had megabucks, and that was the Carlson, I can't think of his first name, but invented the Xerox machine, and he funded the whole thing. He funded that research, and so Ian Stevenson was able to travel the world and interview children all over who had memories of past lives. And so that continues on. The University of Virginia continues on that work under the leadership, I think, of Jim Tucker, whom I have been in contact with in the past on a case that I experienced with a kid. But it's not popular. It's not mainstream, because it says if a child remembered a past life and it could be proven, what the materialist scientists will do is ignore that information, pretend like it doesn't even exist. They'll just pass it off as if it's not important at all. But there's a growing group, a growing understanding of people in science that are saying perhaps there's something to this. Maybe we are more than the brain. Maybe there's something more to us than the brain. Maybe the anthropologists don't have it right. Yes, we have opposing thumbs, no doubt. We walk upright, and we have a pretty good-sized brain. But is that what makes us human? Is that the distinguishing trait? And there's more to it, I believe, than that. But what we do is we study our ancestors' fossilized bones and trail of artifacts that they left behind. From these lines of evidence, we draw comparisons and conclusions on what sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. And we should do this. We should look at this information because it's completely fascinating. Where we came from, the trail of artifacts we left behind. You see an ancient human skull, you see paintings from cave walls in France, you see some early tools, hand tools that were made by humans. And so we say, the anthropologists will say, these are the kinds of things that make us human. You can pick up a tool and you can hide with it or whatever, because we have opposing thumbs. And then you can get up and walk over, get a cup of coffee, and work on it a little bit later. And it's just, it's things that we do, it's behavior and physical ability that they will tend to say make us human. And then, of course, you get into the environmental, social aspect of it, and it gets really complicated, what makes us human. It gets so complicated that I can't read it. I can't stay with it. So the reason is because I don't believe that. I don't believe that's what makes us human. That's the result of another faculty. All of these artifacts are left behind as the result of another faculty, including that skull, including the size of that brain. From a spiritual point of view, I think that the consciousness that we are and that we have created and sustains the brain, sustains the physical counterpart that we putter around in on this planet. Many in the scientific community were stunned by how close the human genetic makeup is to that of the chimpanzee. Yet if our genetic makeup is the determining factor, why is it not the chimpanzee that is conducting this fascinating research? What makes us human? It's something that we have that the chimpanzee doesn't, has nothing to do with genes. Has nothing to do with genes, has nothing to do with the brain. It does have to do with the brain. But the imagination does not reside in the brain. The imagination uses the brain. How many of you have cell phones? Do the people you call and do the communications that you have on the internet reside in that cell phone? The cell phone is a transmitter. It's a way to connect to a larger field. And we call it the cloud, the cloud storage. It's kind of a mystery to everybody, but it's actually hard drives packed off somewhere in caves in Arizona or somewhere. I don't know where all the cloud exists. It doesn't exist up in the sky. But the point is, your cell phone, you could break it open and there's no people inside there. There's nothing in there that would be of any value to you, except maybe the battery that you have to replace once in a while. But that's of no value in terms of how does this thing work? Because the stuff that you communicate with, the things the source of communication or the direction of communication is not in our cell phone. It's a transmitter. It's like the brain. We have invented this thing to do certain things, to communicate, and that's what it does. And what's interesting is we're moving into a society that measures the value of a person by the kind of cell phone they have. And we're moving into a direction that science has been in for a long time. You've got a big brain, so you're something better than everything else. You've got a big cell phone, so you're something better than everybody else. That's the kind of thinking. It's connected to a thing, to an object. But is the cell phone, is it really smart? I mean, we call them smart. Is it really smart? Or is the imagination that invented it smart? Where does the intelligence come from that produces this thing? Do cell phones grow on trees or produce themselves? There's an intelligence behind this technology. And yes, they are pretty impressive when they work. When they break down, it's like, my brain isn't working. And that's what happens with a stroke victim or anyone that has issues with the brain. When the wires begin to get crossed, does that diminish the soul, or does it just diminish the ability to transmit? Does it diminish the ability to communicate? There's a phenomenon that happens, and I can't remember the name, I should have written it down. But when a person is near death, maybe they've been in a coma for years, maybe they have been experiencing dementia and have not even known the people that walk in the room, the family members. A day or two before they die, they become completely clear. They're able to talk, communicate with everybody just like they have always been that way. They go back to their old self, and then they'll pass. And it's inexplicable scientifically, because they should not be able to do this. And relatives usually are very encouraged when something like this happens. They think the person is coming back. And when that happens, they don't come back. But how do you explain it? Based on the scientific model that we have today, you can't explain it. There's no explanation. They try to explain it, just like they try to explain near-death experiences as lack of oxygen, as drugs, and all kinds of, there's quite a list that they go through, all of which have been disproven to any reasonable person's satisfaction. The truth is that we can exist outside of the body, and we probably have for a long time. But if you are a materialist, you believe that all of your being, that which you are, originates in your brain, it's a neurological process, then there's no argument that will convince you otherwise. That's why people like Pim Van Lommel and Bruce Grayson, both on the forefront of near-death research, both started out as materialistic scientists, materially-based scientists, never questioning, came from families of doctors that believe that everything's brain, comes from the brain. When your brain dies, you die, you're gone. And yet they were open-minded enough to start looking into this. Dr. Bruce Grayson said his first experience was, he's never had a near-death experience, but his first case, his first encounter, which was completely terrifying to him, he said. He went to see a patient that had attempted to commit suicide. She was in a coma, and he tried to arouse her, tried to talk to her, nothing happened. So he went down to the hall with another person that was with her in the waiting room and discussed her state of mind, discussed various things about her. The next day he goes back into the patient's room, and she had just awakened and was very, had a hard time speaking, had a hard time communicating, but he said, he introduced himself. She said, "I know who you are." And he said, "How could you know?" He said, "I thought you were unconscious." She said, I saw you." And he said, "You saw me when I was here?" And she said, "No, I was with you in the room, in the waiting room with my friend." And she said, "You had a spaghetti stain on your tie that you were trying to cover up with your white coat. And you became warm, and you took the white coat off and explained the spaghetti stain to my friend." And that's exactly what he did. When he heard this woman say this, he had no information on near-death experience. The term had not been invented yet. Raymond Moody came along a little later and did that, and he was actually one of the students of Dr. Bruce Grayson. But he was a hardcore material scientist. And he says that. And so this totally blew his mind and frightened him. But he began over the years to hear other stories, hear patients talk about it, and developed a very great interest in it. He's been doing this now for over 50 years. He's retired, but still very much involved in this near-death community. There are groups that meet all over the country, support groups. So you have, and Pim van Lommel is the same, his story is exactly the same. He was a material scientist, a cardiologist, that believed everything is about the body. But he began having patients explain things that happened to them. The first patient he revived, he resuscitated. He said the whole team was just elated that they came back, because that was a fairly new procedure when he was doing it. He said the whole team was elated. The patient was livid, angry that they had been brought back from this beautiful place. And he said nobody could understand it. But that was his beginning. He couldn't understand it. And so these two people, and there are many others, said, how could this happen? What is this? How could these people have memories when they're dead, when they're pronounced dead, when everything stops working? And so they devoted the end of their careers basically to research in that area. So I think we're coming back to but a more sophisticated way of understanding, because of our instrumentation, because of our understanding of our past, the whole evolution thing. I think we're going to come back to the understanding that we're not physical beings, that there's something more to us that survives the death of the body. Our faculty of imagination is a duplicate, and I'm speaking from a spiritual perspective here. No scientists would agree with this. Well, quantum scientists might. In fact, they probably would. Our faculty of imagination is a duplicate of the creative aspect of the creative life force. The Word of God, as John calls it. The imagination is the faculty that gives us the status of image and likeness of God. That's the reason that is true is because our mind works exactly like the mind of the creative life force, the creative process that has produced everything. We look around and we see all of the individualized expressions of one life, one energy. And we feel compatibility with life, with all other forms of life. We feel somehow we're close to that being. There's something in us that relates. You feel it with plants, you feel it with animals. Not all animals are friendly, of course. But there is the more we study them, the more we tune into that life. It's one energy that expresses through all we see in the biosphere, the biology, and humanity. We're all part of that. We share that one life energy. And we all share intelligence. This creative life force is intelligent. There's an intelligence. It's not intelligent like smart, kind of like we think of it normally. It's intelligence that knows how to work through a biological system to gather everything it needs to succeed on this planet, in the material world. But if that biological system is removed, life is still there. It's just not expressing in that way. So the reality is not the thing that's running around in the forest, or not us, it's that which is moving it, that which is animating it. It's that which is behind it. And that is not generated by the brain, it generates the brain. The biological aspect is plastic to mind. It responds to consciousness. And we as human beings, this level of soul, are the image likeness of God in the sense that we are endowed with that exact same creative aspect that we see on this planet, that we see every place. We have a mind that operates in exactly the same way that God operates. We don't use it too intelligently sometimes. In fact, we don't use it intelligently a lot of times. But we still have it. It's not a matter of how we're using it, it's a matter of do we have it, and we do have it. And that sets us apart from the rest of. The faculty of imagination is not the product of evolution, and this is important also. It is a fundamental feature of universal consciousness. Humankind, if we look at the trail, you don't see imagination as something that's evolving, it's always been there. The early humans had an imagination and they used it. They used it to address their environment to the best that they understood at the time. They tapped into this creative process that allowed them to continue to keep taking steps. And the brain is a bit like cell phones. You have cell phones that go out of date. I've had several of those. You have the ones that are up to date. The ones that go out of date, I think I have 4 or 5 in my top drawer at home. They've gone extinct because they can't keep up with the amount of intelligence that's being expressed through that technology. It's exactly the same thing in biology. The things that can't carry the mind of God, that can't carry those capabilities, go extinct or self-destruct. We may use our imagination to self-destruct. We may very well do that. We may take ourselves down to the nub, in terms of human existence. That's happened before, natural ways, when the volcano, I think it was Toba, 70,000 years ago, blew up. We were down to a population of a couple of thousand people on this planet. And we came back. But it's the ability to carry that which is already there, the ability to carry imagination and intelligence and life, love and power. These things exist whether the body exists or not. What makes us human is that. It's the mind that expresses through us. And we're either open to that or we're not. But it has nothing to do with the body. The more open we are to it, it changes the body. It may open parts of the brain that were not open before. But that's one of the interesting things about it. I think I've shared this research into psychedelic drugs. What researchers started out believing is when you take some kind of psychedelic drug, it stimulates a part of the brain that's not normally awake. To their surprise, what they discovered is the psychedelic drug actually shuts down the brain. And the person having the experience is free of that. They're free of that, whatever in the brain shuts us down. And that's what gives the broader experience. And this is research is being conducted. I have not read the books about it. I just hear references to this research all the time because it's closely connected with near-death research. I'm not into psychedelics. I don't believe in them, but I think it's a very interesting study. And the reason I don't believe in them is because it's temporary. If we could take a pill and it would enlighten us, why not? But the drug experience enlightens individuals for a time. And we don't normally think of that, but it erases the ego. And the true self comes out. And so what they're discovering is they're shutting the brain down so that you can be yourself. But it lasts about 4 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, a couple of days maybe. So it's temporary. So we want to understand that, whatever is happening there, that's us. That's the reality that we are outside of the brain. The purpose of learning more about our spiritual faculties is not so we may advance the soul. It is for the purpose of making our earthly experience, this journey, as pleasant and as creatively stimulating as possible. Remember, I said that evolution has no goal. We're not moving toward something. We're adapting. We're adapting as we go. But if we leave out the spiritual component, if we just live this earthly life thinking we're a brain and body, and that's it. And so the whole objective of life is to cram information into this brain to get degrees and titles and careers and money and homes and all the things that we use to identify ourselves. If we realize there's something more to us than that, then we may continue to do those things, but realize that there's a deeper reality. But we're not evolving the imagination. We already have it. It's fully functioning at this moment. Where's it pointed? Where's it directed? That's the question. So the purpose of imagination, we don't know where our faculty of imagination can lead us. We've seen already it's led us into some pretty incredible places in terms of the race and space and all the different bottom of the ocean, all the places that we go. While we're often prone to simply let it drift aimlessly through mental and emotional landscapes that have little transformative value, this amazing faculty remains available and waiting to carry us to new frontiers of personal discovery and deeper self-realization. And see, that's the purpose of today's talk is, remember, you've got this faculty. It doesn't have to develop. Just think about where it's been today. Where's your imagination been today? Where's it been just over the last few minutes that I've been up here talking? It goes every place. It's all over the place. I could be up here talking, you could be thinking about, did I leave the stove on? Start worrying about that. And you could be totally gone from here, but you're using that wonderful faculty of imagination. Is that the highest use of it? It's one use of it, and it's an important use. We don't want to minimize that. But its ultimate use is, it is that faculty, it is a God faculty. It's that part of us that allows us to be conscious of our Creator, of this creative life force that is active in us at this very moment. As members of the human species, you and I are endowed with a capacity that sets us in a unique position among the creatures of the world. How we use this distinctively human faculty is up to each one of us. That's why I said I'm not going to get up here and give a lecture on how you should use your imagination. Mine is as wild as yours. It goes off just as quickly as anybody's. But it doesn't mean it's going to destroy you. Here we're just calling attention. You've got this thing and it works just fine. So maybe we could become a little more conscious of what direction it's pointed. Okay? So your work is cut out for you this week. Right, thanks for coming out.
You've been watching a talk given by Reverend Doug Bottorff here at Independent Unity in beautiful Grand Junction, Colorado. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really helps us spread our message. If you would like to support us, you can do so by clicking the button in the right-hand corner of the video screen. We greatly appreciate your support. Thanks again for watching.